For the next session, I'd like to welcome John and Richard, John Stewart and Richard Hall. John was formerly the CEO and chairman of Australia's biggest and most awarded public relations firm, Ogilvy Public Relations. And he basically built it up and sold it to Ogilvy, an award-winning change communications company. So he's got some great experience as the previous regional director of a pretty big media organization. And now he's helping startups and entrepreneurs create amazing businesses. So he's got some great stories to tell. So welcome, John. And we've got Richard Hall, who's the Associate Dean of University of Sydney Business School. And he's a co-director of the Leadership Practice and Performance Systems Research Network, which is a strategic group established by the business school in 2013 to link leadership researchers on the relationships between leadership and management systems. So I'd like to welcome them both to the stage. Give them a big hand, please.
So before we get in, I'll just give you some stats and data around what we're interviewing John and Richard about. Before we go on to that, I just wanted to remind everyone, if you take our last two leaders, Louise and Jan, they are exceptional leaders in all respects. So we could have talked about values, for example, forever with Jan and Louise as well. And the same with these two leaders. We're just focusing on these various elements of leadership. We're taking dimensions from their story, not the whole story. But without exception, every leader as part of the stage is that authentic values-based leader. If they weren't, we certainly wouldn't have risked putting them in our book, that's for sure. So thanks again, guys. So what we're looking at now, the area we're looking at is in Zen practice, we call it beginner's mind. Can you bring an open, fresh mind to what's happening now? And it's called challenge of process in the language, in the leadership language of Jim Kouzes and Barry Posner. And it's this idea of innovation and learning, broadly speaking. Every single leader's role is to, one of the things I'll often ask people is, if you're going to be an industry leader, what are you going to have to do? And you're certainly not going to be following everyone else. So there's this aspect of leadership that's pushing the envelope, that you have to be doing that if you're a leader. And it's about thinking outside the box. So just a quick fun quiz for you. With 4 straight lines, you may have done this, you may not have. Don't give it away if you've done it. With 4 straight lines, without lifting your pencil or pen from the page, connect all 9 dots. Give you a minute. Quickly, have a go. See if you can do it, right? With 4 straight lines, without lifting your pen or pencil, can you connect the dots? And of course, the secret is to do what? Right? Think outside the box. There you go. There's an example. And if you think you're smart and you nailed that once, try with 3 lines and not 4, because you can do it even with 3 lines. But you have to think even more outside the box. And I'm going to give you the answer. There's 3 lines. Okay? So this is just a little fun thing for us to talk about, challenge the process. Now, when leaders, this is probably the most famous quote of all around challenge the process. I haven't failed. John and Richard are going to talk a lot about this idea of failure and iteration, failure and iteration. So if I haven't failed, I've identified 10,000 ways this doesn't work. So does it matter from an engagement? Because the theme of the day is great leadership creates great workplaces. Or does it matter if your leader does challenge a process? Is that a big deal for your engagement? And yes, it is. So people report that they're 25 to 35% more engaged when they work for a boss who's willing to push the envelope, is willing to challenge a process. Our previous 2 leaders, you heard a lot of challenging the process. It's exciting to be around new things, trying new things. But it's not so exciting if you're getting beaten every time you make a mistake when you're trying new things. And the leaders are regarded as 40% more effective. So that's just a key. You do need to challenge a process as a leader. It's an important process. And we've got 2 exceptional leaders here who've done a great job of challenging the process. So I'll start off with you, John. Can you just give us a quick sense of the innovation journey or the change journey that you took Ogilvy through, a little bit like we did on the video?
So a little bit of background, some stats about Ogilvy. Ogilvy, most of you are familiar with, is a big marketing brand in Australia. When I took it on, we had just gone through the process of finishing earn-outs to do with acquiring about 7 different public relations brands. one of which was mine. And as those founders left at the end of their earn-out, I became CEO. And it was at that point a lot of people said, the business is going to tank. This business ran on the energy of those original entrepreneurs and founders. And without that sort of energy driving these businesses, it's going to go. I thought, well, I was one of those entrepreneurs, I was one of those founders, I'll see if I can try and instill that across the broader business. And that was 2008. And by the end of the first year, I was sort of, my old place was still on as a CEO, and the GFC hit. And I saw my revenues absolutely tanking, and we were getting overnight calls from a big, multinational who'd say, we've just heard that our numbers have gone and we're going to have to pull $500,000 out of the budget. So money was just pouring out. And it was at that point, I think I really had to step up the process of innovating and really distinguishing ourselves from other firms. There are about 300 different public relations companies in Australia, and a lot of the very, very good specialist ones, as well as large multinationals. And the nature of the work is it's very project-based, and clients, for those of you working in big multinationals, engaging PR firms, you've changed your budget. You've gone from big 1 year or 2 year budgets and engagements down to lots of smaller projects. And it makes running an agency very, very difficult. So we had about just over 100 staff, and I developed this philosophy, and I've got props.
Awesome. He had a bag, and I was like, what
I had
are
a
you
bag.
going to do with
That
that
was
bag?
my Woolies bag. My wife, as I walked out the door this morning, she says, "You're such a Wally." I'm sorry. Anyway, I've got props. And the first prop was, in talking to the staff, what do we really want to stand for? We wanted to be the number one PR firm in the country. And at the time, Cadell Evans was doing wonderful things, so the yellow jersey. And the good thing about the yellow jersey as a story was that it's all about stages. We constantly were pitching, day in, day out. And there was no prize ever for coming second, so you constantly had to be wearing that yellow jersey. And I'd done lots of work with internal comms over the years and engagement, and I knew that physical props, funnily enough, have a much better recall than words. So if I could tell a whole story around the yellow jersey and why that's important, then that would work. And being number one wasn't just for us as a company. It was about the different areas of specialisation that we'd developed firms in. And it was about the individuals. If you were in consumer PR and you were an expert in travel, how could you be the number one as a PR professional in that particular role? So it went right up the organisation. But also it was, well, what other new areas could we play in where we could be number one? And social media was, towards in the 08s, we'd had a number of failed attempts trying to get it off the ground, and I went on a treasure hunt and went to our office in Washington, which was going gangbusters in social, and brought back, one of their top people, and pretty quickly we were at $2 million in social revenue. We started a practice called Ogilvy Earth, which is all about helping companies make that sustainability journey. Another practice around research, and they're the ones that I can boast about, but there were plenty of other failed attempts along the way. And I'm completely used to failure because I'm a failed. I've started lots of business over the years. Some of them work, some of them don't. That's all right. That's all just part of the journey. What I do now, working with entrepreneurs, I'm completely used to that as well. By the end of that, I finished as CEO 5 years later, and by the end of that time, over 20% of our revenue was from new practice areas, new products, new services, new geographies that didn't exist 5 years before. And rather than decline, actually it was a record year, and it all turned out well. So it was good. But someone raised a point before about self-doubt. There was lots of moments along the way of complete and utter self-doubt, because it's really humiliating when your numbers look terrible and you're standing up there and you let staff go, and the next big thing isn't gaining traction. But it's also deeply satisfying when things do come together, and at the end of the day, it all does work out.
Thanks, John. And Richard, you started the EMBA program, was it about 5 years ago now?
6 years ago.
6
yeah.
years ago.
Yeah.
So another MBA program or another EMBA program from a cold start. It was the split, Sydney Uni and AGS. It was the AGSM split, wasn't it?
Yep.
So, and then you won the AFR Boss Best MBA of the year last year. Is that correct? Yeah. So that's from a cold start. 5 years later, you win the Best EMBA against a lot of established competitors. That would have taken some serious challenging the process.
Especially in a university setting, Michael. Yeah, there's something about a university that's full of process, but fortunately it's full of lots of people who want to challenge the process as well, so that actually turned out to be an asset. But just a bit of the backstory. Sydney actually had an MBA program in the 1970s, the 1980s, around early 1990s. It moved out of that space and was frozen out of that space effectively 15 years. So 2005, 2006, the opportunity came to get back into that area. And I was actually very much blessed to be part of a great team that started to build with really literally the blank sheet of paper, start from the ground up. And also had a very supportive director who was effectively the dean of the school, who had the great advantage of being supportive and not knowing what an MBA was. Turned out to be a fabulous asset. I'll never forget, he said to me, and I'll just adjust this slightly, he said, we've got to have an MBA program. I don't know what that is, but it better be bloody great. I'll just temper the language a little bit, so don't muck it up. So good writing instructions, okay, clear demonstration of support, but a fair bit of scope to work with there. And so working with that opportunity, we went, well, I'm sure we'll talk about this more, went to the data and went to the evidence. And we went to some what we thought were fairly compelling ways of thinking about the ways to challenge the process. One of the ones that really worked for us a lot was to sort of peddle the discourse and peddle the argument that this is all about Newco. Coreco is super important. University of Sydney is a massive, venerable institution. Business school is a fair size. It's got a lot of great Coreco assets, but this is about Newco. How can we develop something that's innovative, that not only meets the market, okay, because we had to argue this is a new area for us, different from Coreco that you're accustomed to. We need to meet the market in this because it's not just a matter of doing what we normally do and putting it out there and they shall come. Secondly, we have to jump ahead and beat the competition because it's a hyper-competitive environment in the MBA space globally as well as within Australia. And thirdly, exploit our assets. Know what we're good at, know what we're not good at, and let's exploit that and make up the shortfalls that we've got. You know, you work with those three things, I think, you can develop, I think, a fairly commanding discourse and narrative around that. Because as you know, Michael, I believe that leadership is fundamentally a discursive accomplishment, you know, so you're working with that kind of narrative in order to get things up off the ground. One thing I spoke about before that I'd like to mention is the significance and particularities of your context. You need to understand the environment really well, so get a good picture of what that competitive environment is like, but also understand the constraints and affordances of your own institution. You know, what it's really good at and what it's not really good at. As I said right at the opening, academics tend to be a conservative lot. You know, they're not the risk takers like your lot tend to be. Perhaps not immediately thought of as being creative. You know, they can be quite conservative, particularly at an institution like Sydney. But I pretty quickly realised that Sydney was conservative is true in part, but it's the institution very often that's quite conservative in its processes. The individual academics themselves are actually quite bold. They're often quite frustrated by the process. So if you can harness that real energy they've got to actually make a mark, do something that they think is great, aspire to be number one in that space, and yet help them provide means of overcoming the obstacles associated with a conservative institution, you're probably going to be backing a winner. You're probably going to get a lot of momentum behind that. We've got a fair bit of momentum behind it.
So I'm going to keep going with your story, and we'll come back to the three horizons in a moment, because I'm remembering your question, Andrew, working in a government department is probably having a lot of echoes right now. Gee whiz, how did Richard do this? How did he create this innovation within this? So I wonder if you could talk us through the process of getting these academics working with the process. How did you try? You tried so many different things. What was your process of innovating within conservatism?
Yeah, sure. With that conservative area, well, again, knowing your context. So one thing that academics, the contributors for the program, the intellectual capital we had to work with, they love evidence. They respect data. You know, they respect the evidence and the research. So you've got to get that research and data on side. So we did exhaustive research around what the market wanted, what the competition was doing, what the best places were doing, where the trends were going. GFC features, of course, in this story as well. And we used that as a leverage point. We had a spin on the story of the GFC for this management education. Here's the compelling case. The GFC exposed the fact that lots of corporations lacked a middle tier of emerging managers who knew what to do when the rule book ran out. Leadership can be defined in some ways as what you do when the rule book doesn't tell you what to do. And with that, they go, yeah, okay, that makes sense to me, and we can make a contribution to that. We can teach people how to think differently, to be innovative, to think on their feet effectively, and to innovate in organisations. Very different mindset from teaching them accounting 101, blah, 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 finance, marketing, from the basics. So the orientation around that, but capturing the imagination of the people you need to get on board. And secondly, I think really trusting them and their input and working with them exhaustively, not just, okay, what are you going to roll out here? What are you going to pull out of the filing cabinet? But how are we going to meet that market in an innovative way? You've got a lot of skills. Let's bring those together. I think is very compelling. So I think the data, the evidence, and marshalling that in the circumstances for me was really very, very important, very valuable.
Okay, great. And so how did you interact with you must have had several naysayers or more than several naysayers. Can you just tell us about the process of reassurance when you're working in that, and so many of you are working in those conservative structures? How do you manage the naysayers that no, it'll never work people?
Okay, I think that is going to be quite tough. I think, though, that it does come back down to that narrative, and it comes down to, in a sense, what have we got to lose? It's Newco here. What do we want to do with this? We've got a golden opportunity. My line was, how many top 50 or 100 business schools in the world do you have where you don't have an MBA and you get the chance to build it from? Do you want to be part of this game or not? That got them in a lot of the time. Well, this is a unique opportunity to try and influence that. And so, the naysayers might say, oh, it can't work, it won't work. You go back to the data and say, this is what the market's looking for. Oh, it hasn't happened, it hasn't worked, because no one's really done it. We've got that opportunity. What if I build you something and create the space where you can actually do that? Will you give it a shot? And those little successes are amazing. They go, wow, this stuff really works. Experiential learning is really something that people respond to. And you can build on those small wins, right? You learn from the little failures. You've got to have loads of them as well. That's part of the risk. But the thing about the failure thing, I'm sure we get to talk to, as they say in the Valley, fail early, fail fast, fail often, and most importantly, learn the lessons of your failure.
Have you got an example of a fail process that changed the way you did things in the program?
Yeah, too many. Too many to choose from. I guess, you've got to be really brutally honest about some of this stuff, I suppose. We work in our leadership module, which I know you know a bit about, Michael, with a political perspective angle on what leadership means. And a number of times there we worked with currently serving and recently retired politicians, as talent. And that proved to be a flawed strategy in the sense that our students came away with the observation, it's a valuable observation, that these people are either seriously damaged or seriously deluded or perhaps both. And that was valuable, but we were looking for a little more learning in that. So we changed tack, and so we've been working with different strategies there around political strategy. That's just one example. You've got to face the facts sometimes.
And you obviously built in a strong feedback process to know that.
You bet, yeah. Absolutely.
And as much feedback as you can get from as many people as possible. We'd typically, between each 12-month iteration of any instance, have 4 or 5 meetings where we went through the feedback time and time again, and took on board really seriously novel ideas that people had.
It's extraordinary. We keep coming so far on the theme of the day. If you guys must be noticing, feedback just keeps coming up. And interesting, it's an old one, but gee, it seems so relevant and continue. And John, you said when I was interviewing you around your story, you talked about I don't want to become a grey hair. I think you used a term, something like that, and the idea of the word on the street. Can you talk a little bit about that as well? Because you talked about how crucial that was for your innovation process, your challenger process.
Yeah, it's...
Firstly, what do you mean by the grey hair and the word on the street?
Well, I didn't want to be out of touch with what's going on in the business. And a lot of the best ideas came from our staff who were day in, day out working directly with clients, from even other industries or colleagues. And so I got to know everybody's name in the business, which I know has come up a few times today. So I just found it courtesy, but also really very much culture building. And in the research that would always come up was John knew my name, which is really unusual. And I would have, my sister would organise a week, many weeks through the year of one-on-one catch-ups with people from all areas across the business. And I wanted to see, have at least a half-hour, coffee chat with everyone through the year. But the funny thing was that it was somewhat unexpected because a lot of times someone would go, "Am I in trouble?" And my team would go, no, he just wants to catch up and have a chat. He wants to find work about this project you're working on for Telstra, whoever it is. "Oh, you sure? You sure I'm not in trouble?" And then they'd come in all sweating and worried that they're... And I got some wonderful ideas about what we should be doing as a business from listening. And there's I'll pull out another prop, because there's a wonderful David Ogilvy story where when anyone joined the business or was promoted to a managerial role, arriving on their desk would be a babushka doll. And on the inside would say, if we hire people bigger than ourselves, we'll become a company of giants. And, I was not... Technically, there were wonderful people throughout the business who, much, much better in media relations or government relations or any number of different skills than me. And that actually ended up being a great advantage of mine, because if a client wanted the best team, I would never be on that team. But I could help hire and make sure we had a culture that attracted the best people and that those people were enabled to do terrific work. And I told a friend of mine at some stage, I said, "I've just been to a meeting and the client asked a question. I was just about to open my mouth when one of my senior advisors gave the exact opposite advice to I was going to give." I thought, that's not going to go down well. And the client said, "Great advice." Oh, jeez, right, okay. And then another person asked similar, another question, tricky question, gave an answer, again, different to what I was going to say. And anyway, to cut a long story short, I told two friends. One, in a managerial role, he, patted me on the back and said, "Don't worry, you're just having an off day. I'm sure, you're still good." And another mate of mine who's, one of the most successful entrepreneurs I know, he patted me on the back and said, "Congratulations. When you're the dumbest person in the room, you're doing a lot right." Which...
Share that in common.
Now, my wife and kids would say, "That's easy for you." But, and so the babushka doll, I think there's a lot of meaning to that.
Fantastic. Thanks, John.
Can I just come in on a quick one about that
yeah.
fail thing? I think if I might, Michael, the great enemy of that of failing productively is blame. And I think one of the great things we can do in that culture setting, I don't know if you agree, John, is making sure that there's just no time or limited time spent on blame. Let's just move on here. We've done this. What do we learn from that? I think that fear and the sweaty palms and what does John want to see me for? Something we can all relate to, but it's so powerful when you're sending consistently that message. We're not interested in the blame.
But I think that's part of the negotiation when you enter into something entrepreneurial.
Yeah.
To use the bus metaphor that's been used before, I'm really happy getting on a bus that says, we don't know exactly where we're going, but we've got a rough idea. And if it doesn't end up exactly where you thought, sometimes that's actually better. With some of the tech companies I work with now, the iteration process ends up in a different market. We're all happy because it's working.
Yeah, so it's a paradox because you've got a very clear vision, but the vision's not defined enough that you can't innovate crazy, and you don't even know what that looks like.
So much ambiguity. And, and if you put your hand up and go, it's all right, we may make a complete mess of this, but we're all right with it.
Yeah. So I haven't prepared you guys for this question. I'm going to throw a question at you. So if you're a leader, part of your role is to ensure high standards, excellence, performance, nailing things, and that's the whole accountability piece. It's super important. And equally, you've got to create innovative environments, non-blame environments, which in some sense could be a non-accountable environment. You could easily interpret that. If you're someone in the audience saying, "Oh, well, all this stuff around no-blame culture, actually, where's accountability going to go?" How have you managed that through both of your careers around innovating and changing and pushing? I think, John, you said even if they fail, you reward the process. How have you managed accountability and learning space and innovation together?
My experience is in looking at different people in our business and different stages of their careers and experience, that I would often identify 3 types of people: the technician, the manager, and the entrepreneur. And the technicians were really comfortable doing the day in, day out work. From A to B, they were phenomenal. And clients would love them, and the outcomes were consistently terrific. But promote them and you're asking for disaster. They hated it for whatever reason. They couldn't manage other people, they're disorganised, whatever, just different realm, different beast. Managers, I could love managers. The managers would make sure that the right teams were put on jobs, the P&Ls were structured, the resource plans, all those important things it took to run the business. And then there's the other beast, the entrepreneur. And I found them rarer in corporates, but because often they'd gone off and done their own thing. But for someone who was showing an entrepreneurial flair, saying, I really think there's an opportunity for us to build a business or a capability that does this, I'd say, do you? Right, excellent. Go and build a plan for me. Same time next week, let's have a look. And I would love then, coaching and mentoring. Now, if along the way the execution lacked because they missed deadlines, they didn't do what they delivered, that's a very different conversation where, was the strategy flawed? Was there really not a market for it? From a performance perspective, we've realised very quickly that one of the number one determinants of attracting the best talent was already having the best talent. And if we carried C-grade players, despite our best efforts to develop, to improve, for too long, we'd lose our A players. They go, I'm sick of doing all the work and carrying these people. So we actually became quite quick around working out, is someone a good fit for us or not? And if they weren't, then encouraging them somewhere else. But with respect to failure, if someone failed having a really good go at an idea, but they delivered, to be congratulated, no issue. If they failed because they were tardy, they didn't manage budgets, they didn't manage communication, that was unacceptable.
I'd agree with all that. I mean, in our circumstance, I guess, to just add a couple of things, accountability for what I think I'd say accountability for the values, for living and delivering on the values, and that they can be quite specific, perhaps to your team and your organisation, and ultimately, maybe most importantly, accountable for learning. Like what you do need to do is to come back with the learning around this, okay? I mean, because the outcomes are often so fuzzy in the measures, there's so many different forces at play, market conditions, whatever, errors there, but it's really important. We all come back here and we focus on what we're learning through this process, but the one kind of, the zero tolerance, but very small tolerance is around breaching the values of the team and the organisation, because you're letting that stuff in, it quickly becomes corrosive, and to me, in a high trust environment like this sort of setting that I'm used to and you're used to too, we're expecting a lot extra from your people. They need to give a lot extra. If that trust isn't there, if the honesty isn't there, if the service excellence, some of the values that we work with, they're being breached, then that's pretty serious.
And Richard, you said one of the times we were chatting, the quote I remembered after you said what you said was, culture eats strategy for breakfast.
Right.
And you talked about the crucial need to work on the culture for innovation versus constantly trying to get innovative strategies in place. Can you talk a little bit like, imagine I'm a young leader and I'm going, Richard, how do I create a culture of innovation? What is that? How do I do that?
Well, I think it's about modelling and demonstrating a tolerance for failure and rewarding sort of initiative and great ideas even when they don't work. So I think you can do that in the leadership role very powerfully by admitting where you yourself got stuff wrong. Admitting of many vulnerabilities there, admitting that you don't always know the answer, and that you take other people's perspectives really very seriously around that and go, let's give that a try. Let's expose that. Let's get a proposal up in a week and give that a go. You know, I'd see eyes light up for partner facilitators when they come up with a crazy idea and say, I think that's fabulous because that fits with our values, it fits with our ambition, and it probably won't work, but let's go out there and do it.
Yeah.
You know, let's go out there and do it. You know, what's the worst going to happen? We're going to fail trying something great, you know. But you're not betting the whole bank or the whole firm or the whole school in that, but you're nevertheless doing that and demonstrating that you really are open for that, not just paying lip service to it, you know, which I think lots of organisations do, and they look at the reward structures they have. They go, we value innovation, we value creativity, but if you don't hit your numbers, you're out. You don't get your bonus.
I just want to make one more question. One interesting observation. One of the remarkable things I've noticed in meeting so many exceptional leaders is the deep sense of security that perhaps you take for granted. I'm not sure. I'm sure you're aware of it, because the amount of emotional security it takes to be able to get a great idea from someone 5 tiers down the organization and run with it when wasn't built here, or to let other people run with the ideas. Have you ever had to work with that in yourself, where there's a sense of, hold on a second, I'm supposed to be the star here, I'm the leader? Is it something conscious, or it's just come naturally? Because for a lot of people it doesn't come naturally. It's quite scary for other people to have ideas, particularly if those other people might one day actually look to get my position. And it seems like, that dynamic can kill innovation and learning really fast.
Well, my job's so unattractive that no one would want it.
Yeah, look, I would. It is one of the bigger bottlenecks for businesses. I found, and particularly the entrepreneurs I work with, to accept that they need to hire people better than themselves. Yeah. Because it is quite challenging to them. I don't get that, because I'd much prefer to have other people much smarter around the table. Be the dumbest guy in the room.
I think the thing I often say to people in that situation is, hire the best. They'll make you look good. Great teams. They attribute this to the leader and go, well, I'm just trying to create a culture in which these people can do their best work, but let's be quite extrinsic about it, quite instrumental. They'll make you look good.
I think you judged on different things, because my view was I was being judged on what the overall business looked like.
Yeah.
And that's far more important, to create a business that was able to attract the best staff and deliver great outcomes for clients and have a really good P&L. That was more important than being the star yourself.
Yeah.
Okay, guys, I think we want to break now. Does anyone have one question before we launch into a discussion? All right, let's get into a discussion mode. We have 20 minutes tops, and then we'll have 5 minutes for Q&A.
So in the spirit of Challenger Process, I've prepared a discussion question, but I wonder if you guys would want to offer a Challenger Process discussion question worth, it's not up there yet. If you thought of it, what would you think would be a valuable conversation for the tables to have around Challenger Process, innovation and learning right now?
Mine would be, what percent of your revenue, of today's revenue, comes from new products and services that didn't exist 3 years ago?
Repeat that.
And then when that's an alarmingly small number, what's the one thing in your organisation that's stopping your people from challenging the process? From your people, not yourself, but from your people and your team or your organisation.
Okay. All right, great. So we leave those both. So I'll just repeat what I've heard is, what's the one thing that you believe is killing or challenging or stopping Challenger Process and innovation? I'd just like to add a little thing on that, is that we're really powerful if you can model away on that as well at your tables and self-reflect. What's the one thing I might be doing that's also killing it? Not just my people.
Right, that's right.
What's the one thing I might be doing? And then another one, reflect maybe back and forward, is what in the last 3 years did you say?
The last 3 years, what percent of revenue comes from new products and services that didn't exist prior to that?
Yeah. Okay. Those are your discussion questions. We'll leave it at that. We'll see you back in
20 minutes.
20 minutes.
If culture is values and values is just behaviours, and for me, if we're talking about vulnerability, and vulnerability is just removal of ego, how do we reward the behaviour around removing the ego to create the culture of vulnerability? Is that a question?
John, over to you. No, I think
Really academic.
I think, yeah, that's right. If I can't make up an answer, who can? Yeah. No, I actually do think that is spot on. I mean, I like the way that the behaviour is the lived version of the values, you know, and I think you do. I mean, one simple maybe way in which to do that quite practically is to reward sharing. You know, I mean, you make that a KPI, you know. There's been some great studies done at successful organisations in terms of the social network analysis, you know, who talks to who, who's an influencer, who are you getting the ideas from. And when you've got that kind of data there, you know, I remember that story about when Eric Schmidt went to Novell, you know, one of the first things he did was ask the 10 smartest people he could find, who are the 10 smartest people, who are the 10 smartest people, who are the influencers in the organisation. There's a lot of great research, I think, around that. So those people, maybe to create an opportunity where you're rewarded for giving up your time, giving up your energy to helping out someone else on a project with an idea, with the knowledge sharing. I know knowledge management is not as fashionable now as a term as it was 10 years ago, but I still think a lot of those key messages are really relevant. So are we just fixated on rewarding too much the final outcome and tying that to your KPIs and your numbers, or are there some other things which facilitate the more innovative culture and the more innovative organisation, and you can find ways to reward that selfless behaviour there about taking time out to provide assistance on someone else's project? I don't see why they can't be one of those things that you're required to report on. That's just one idea about how you can reward that sort of behaviour.
There's a really good saying, something along the lines of, success has many parents, failure is an orphan. And in the wrong culture, someone, you know, can quickly identify someone who's put their hand up as, you know, being the champion of something. I know that we would regularly have all team meetings, and we would really encourage the most junior staff to be up there presenting the work that they've done on different projects, so that we can get away from, you know, the managers or any individual stealing the spotlight, because that is really countercultural. Because you then disenfranchise the other staff around them who are going, well, you know, Joe Blow here's taking all the glory on this, but actually I did the bulk of the work. You know, screw that, I'm going somewhere else where I will get the. So I think that, you know, being close enough to it is really important.
In fact, to add something to that, with the model away practice at the beginning of the day, and just remind all of us as leaders that a leader who doesn't model away around vulnerability and openness and sharing and recognizing other people's ideas, I don't care how many systems and processes you put in place, it will not succeed if the leader is not actually modeling the behavior. It just won't. You're setting the emotional tone, and I think even Tyrone said earlier, we're talking about the challenge of giving and receiving feedback, you know, in different cultures. But the leader does set the tone of the team, absolutely, informally for sure, and obviously you want to do it consciously as much as you can, which is that formality.
Philosophically, for me, the whole message, leadership is all about success for and through other people. And sometimes congratulating, saying, you know, well done, you know, that great piece of work, and the manager would go, oh, I didn't have anything to do with it. Yes, you did, because you hired that person despite, you know, so-and-so saying not to, and, you know, building up some other success around ownership that people, you know, can own a broader sense of success. But limelight stealers, out.
So did you make that up just now, that definition of leadership? Because I'm fond of saying leadership is something you do through and with and for others.
Right, that's a great question, by the way. Thank you. Any others? Go, one more here, and then one here at the back.
John, you mentioned 3 archetypes, entrepreneurs, managers, and technicians. So which of those, if you're looking for a leader, like a succession, which archetype do you believe, from your experience, is the better for becoming a leader?
The entrepreneur. Because the entrepreneur is worried about building the business model, hiring the technicians, hiring the managers to put it in place. The struggle I've had with technicians, growing them into, is that they become the bottleneck because they're shy of hiring other people. They limit, they say no to work, they limit how quickly the business can grow. The managers don't, there's another, I'm not going to play too much around with the definition, because all of us have got a bit of a mix of the three of us. and it's just different people's weightings and different times in their career and different skills, etc. But I'm really interested in someone who, funnily enough, a little bit counterintuitive, it could be a bit on the lazier side, be the entrepreneur. Because they're more attuned to wanting to get work done through a bigger team. Some of the worst entrepreneurs I've worked with are people who are complete workaholics and don't delegate and don't look at building a bigger structure and systems, etc. So if I had to err on, I'd go the entrepreneur and go, I can hire so long as we can hire great technicians, you'd certainly be able to, find the managers, and if the entrepreneur is setting the culture of the business and the ultimate value we're creating and offering to customers, then that's probably the skill set that I'd see most likely to succeed.
Awesome. I like the idea of entrepreneurs not doing much. It's a great idea.
There's some themes keep appearing, and I love it. Failure, self-doubt, vulnerability, being dumb and lazy, you just mentioned. All the stuff we traditionally think is all very negative, and the story is showing the positive possibilities around it. And there's a lot of energy around it. I know in institutions, in managers, a lot of energy around this stuff. Now, my question to the innovation guru on the stage is, if there's a lot of energy, then there's a lot of resources to be leveraged in those energy. So how do we leverage those energies innovatively in an institution, including fear and ego? Thank you.
I might just talk a bit about a model. It's not mine. It's called The Three Horizons. It's a wonderful book written called Alchemy of Growth. And it is about balancing resources. And it's saying you've got your core business that delivers today's profits, and you manage that, with some degrees of innovation around it, but it's very much about making sure we're maximising profits today. We've then got the second horizon, which is all about revenue growth. And because I had two public companies as shareholders, that would cause problems for me at times, because everyone was so concerned about margins that if we grew revenue too much without converting enough through to profit, people get confused. And there was a famous saying, revenue is vanity, profit is sanity. And so it was trying to balance how much you can be really pushing in a high growth revenue as opposed to pure profit. And then this third area, which were really more speculative, be it new products, new markets, new JVs, whatever it might be, you can really only afford to play around quite carefully with how many you take on board, because if the whole business became focused around them, then chances are your profits would go, your revenues look miserable, you'd be spinning too many plates. And so from a resource management perspective, understanding and managing to those three horizons concurrently is very challenging, but also very important.
Beautiful.
I'd like to just talk about, if we don't end up with another question, this might be a wrap-up. We've seen, and many of you consultants in the room as well, we've debriefed, several thousand 360 feedback assessments, and we've come to the realization that you can tell who the good leaders in the room within about 10 minutes without even looking at their scores. And it's a strange paradox, because what we found very reliably, of course there's the occasional exception, that the people who've got the best 360 assessment score in their leadership are the most bright-eyed, wide-open, wanting to learn. But if you look at their 360 score, they have the least to learn, obviously, about leadership. And then you see the people who've got really low scores. As a general rule, they think they've got nothing to learn, and they're busy invested defending their results and justifying and rationalizing. And just to tie the story in, when I was... So Jim Kouzes and Barry Posner don't work much with mindfulness, and they're both close to 70 years old. And I just mentioned to Jim about 2 months ago something about mindfulness. And the next thing I know, he's popping 5 different research articles back at me about mindfulness. And like I said to Jim, and these guys, they're global stars in this field. I said, Jim, where do you get this time? And he said, I love learning. And one of their key... one of their findings and one of their taglines is the best leaders are the best learners. There's this genuine openness, this love of learning, this love of pushing into the unknown. And the known is security. That's where I get my identity and security into this inner, again, I have this focus, this inner process in all of us to push into the discomfort, to lean into the discomfort of the unknown. Seems to be a hallmark quality of great leaders. And as I try to once help my son understand this, I said to him, because interestingly enough, 62% of innovative ideas, its research shows, comes from the external. They don't come from you or even your organization. And I was just trying to be a good parent one day, and I said, today, when you get back from school, because he was not being popular with the kids, he was struggling to connect. I said, just come back and tell me 5 new things you learned about people today, and that's your project. He'd come back each day. And it was amazing to watch how his friendships and his connections grew, and his joy grew in him with this one simple practice. And to me, it's quintessential leadership practice to be interested, not interesting. And that's what you guys are displaying so beautifully, this constant interest and openness that is a requirement. It's a requirement in complexity. It's a requirement in leadership. And also, if you're spiritually inclined, it's a profound spiritual practice to be truly curious, truly beginner's mind, truly open. And it's hard some days, scary some days. So I just wanted to add that around challenge of process.
Awesome. Well, can we give a big hand for these two guys?